All right. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Soul Horse Sunday, another conversation in how the horse fulfills its role in our spiritual journey. And my guest today is Kim McElroy, and a lot of you know about her. She needs no introduction. She's a very famous and accomplished artist working with horses and spiritual meanings within the art and metaphoric meanings within the art. So I'm so glad to have you here today, Kim. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, and we were just having a little conversation before we started the recording about some things that she has coming up. But first, I'd like to go over a couple of other things that I read on your website and have you maybe comment on them. And I'm without power here today, so I couldn't print out my notes, so I will just read them. Okay, on your webpage, on your first page, you say, the purpose of my art is to share the gifts that horses offer in images that evoke the wisdom our hearts remember. And I really, really appreciate that quote because I think there was a time for most of us when we were younger before we became polluted with what we should think and how we should feel and what we should know with animals or nature in our environment, that it kind of all got lost in the teaching and the training and the correction, unwittingly or not. And I like the way that you put that, how that they remind us of that. Do you want to speak just a little bit to that?
Sure. I totally agree with what you're saying. I think when I refer to that feeling, it usually is that childlike, innocent part of me that wanted to connect with this amazing being, which it's a great mystery to me that, I always think that I say that horses are in us before we're born. Like there's something about them that we come in with, most of us that love them. Some people find it later in life, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't like always present, sort of in a subliminal way. But I do feel that there's something about them that, given any excuse, is sparked somewhere along the way. And there's no words for it really, which is why I create art. Right. But it's a deep kinship. And when what little experience I had with horses as a child, it informed that, but it was in me before I had those experiences. So I do feel like, I often say, and you'll see on my website, I tell stories about playing horse as a child. And I did that before I really even had like riding lessons or going to any kind of a stable or places where horses were kept. In fact, that was all a great mystery to me. I didn't know much about horses other than the children's books that I read, like Misty of Chincoteague. And even those books, they were evocative, but I was always somewhat disappointed in them because the stories felt like more about the people characters than the horses. And I think that was probably before I was too young to read Black Beauty at that time. So that was at least told from the perspective of the horse. But Black Beauty is also about the horse being in the human world, and it's rather traumatic. So it's a very that walking that line between inspiration and the reality became very like a dichotomy, and I just wanted to know the pure beingness of the horse, and probably didn't really get to experience that until I was an adult in terms of knowing I was experiencing it. But when I did have a chance to be with horses by myself without other adults around, or as you say, teachers or riding instructors or people telling me how I had to be with them, those were the magical moments that infused everything I wished for and hoped for, and that fascination.
Interesting how you say that they're in us before we're born. I've never thought of it like that, but I often say that, for those of us that have horse in our blood, it does. And I just recently did a blog post about more animal than human, because when I'm around, I often take my horses and my dog out to dinner or for a picnic, or we go out for the day. I trailer them
That's
out just so
great.
that we can go and do that. But it's so comforting for me. It's so, I feel so safe in that environment. My family is not a family about animals. It's a totally different thing. I was, we didn't have animals, and it was just, animals didn't matter. They didn't count. They didn't have a soul. And so I didn't have a horse until I was adult. I wasn't around them very much, but it was always there, that the need to be around my soul kin.
Yeah.
And so when I'm out with my horses, I do this a lot. And I'll be there now. I leave my gray horse loose. She can be trusted, and I hold on to my bay mare. And we just hang out for an hour and a half. If I take them out to dinner, let them graze, we walk around. And I feel so safe and so connected, because there we all share like a similar spiritual philosophy. Whereas with, physical families, that isn't always the same. But if you're born with horse in you already, it's like you did bring, that's an interesting thought. I'll have to write about that. But you bring it with you. So it makes sense that you would need it here to connect.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that I read your bio on your page, and you had talked about you had wanted a horse, and you bothered your parents until they finally got you these lessons. But then when you got there, it was nothing like you imagined, because the horses were treated as machines, as a way to earn their living. You were told to do things that weren't congruent with how you felt about horses. And you talked about how that you were upset because it's not the experience that you had anticipated.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And what turned that for you?
Yeah. And looking back, I realized that, there's been so much progress now, thank goodness, in the
Right.
way horses can be seen by humans as interacting with them on a relational basis, like that the horse has a voice in their own, that the person is asking the horse, what do you want, or how can we work through this together, or whatever. Whereas there, it was more of a, the horse is there to be their recreation. And I never really understood it. I didn't have the drive like some people do to ride. But that's what people told me. That's what I should do if I loved horses.
Right. What else would you do with a horse?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was placed on the back of a horse and told to yank, the reins around and kick them to make them go. And I didn't understand it, but when you're young, you do what the adults tell you. And I didn't like it. And I found that the time that I really wanted to be with them was when no one else was around, and I was able to be with them one-on-one, just in their resting periods in the stalls and the little paddocks that they had. And there was a stillness there that was very comforting, and something I didn't really find anywhere else. So it felt like the place that was very mundane, it was an old, it had probably been there for 30 years before I had come along. And so, the barns were run down, and the property was run down, and there wasn't a lot of care. The people that owned it were older. And so all the activity around all the riding instruction and the things that people did there with their horses, just all of it went away in the afternoons. I don't know if people went to work, but it was like the place emptied out, and it was just me and the horses, it felt like. And that was the times when I treasured the moments with the horses, because I felt like they were able to be themselves. Like, it's kind of like the image of, like the zoo, when all the people leave and the zoo animals are able to kind of come out of their shelters and their cages, or you just want to let them all go. kind of feeling, but they can't, they're domestic, but they in themselves felt peaceful. And then I really got to see the beings that I felt were the beings that I knew in my heart. And I think I could find myself there in those spaces as well.
Right. Yeah. Going back to we spoke earlier about being a child and you're innocent. When I was young, I read Black Beauty. And as an adult, I could never read that book. Now that I know more, I could never read Black Beauty
Right.
at this place in my life. I'm going to go to see if I can find my notes. Like I said, I couldn't print them out because we have no power. But there was something else when you were talking about when you and a friend went to an Arabian ranch, you and a fellow artist when you were in school. You in art school, and you started doing these, you called them scribbles, and she recognized the horses. And you said, see, during that time, I mostly drew unicorns and horses in fantasy realms because at some level, I wanted to believe that real horses in the world were capable of that magical power. But I couldn't reconcile that belief with the impressions of the horses I had encountered. And actually, that wasn't the one I wanted to come up with now, but that was actually kind of what you just spoke on. But when you were with this woman and she picked out the horses through the scribbles in your drawings, and you realized, okay, you said right here, I realized then that my drawings were somehow an imprint of the emotional energy of the horse rather than merely a drawing. And so can you speak a little bit about that and how that has appeared in your through your work and through your journey with horses?
Sure. Yeah, that was, I think up to that time I had been taught sort of like we're talking about how we're taught as children how horses are a certain way or the world is a certain way. Even in my art education, I think by that time in my early 20s, I would have been, pursuing the goal of perfecting the skill of being able to create something that looked beautiful or had a realism to it, that was semi-photorealistic or whatever. And when I got into college, fortunately, I was exposed to some teaching called by a woman named Betty Edwards, who wrote a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And even though I was already an artist, and that book is essentially teaching, her master's thesis was to teach that everyone can draw. Part of it is about the art of seeing and letting go of your critical mind so that you can make movements and gestures in drawing that are an impression, in this case, what's called gesture drawing, rather than a realistic drawing of a still model or a still life, as they call it. So at that time, I was doing these drawings and sketches that were very brief because the horses were galloping around. And as I mentioned in the story, it was really the first time, and looking back, it was the first time I'd been exposed to horses running around at liberty, which is astonishing. But really at that time in my life, it was the only experience I'd ever been personally present when that was happening. And so the feeling was that the, how to capture this moving, beautiful, inspiring, energetic being moving around, and I couldn't take a photograph of it. So how to take that feeling and put it on paper in some recognizable form that would convey to a viewer or to myself at a later time what happened. And I often refer to them almost like cave paintings because they were very, very simplified, and they had an essence to them of just the line of the body of the horse or the legs in motion, and not anatomical and not necessarily in proportion, but it had this impression. And when she observed, it was the woman who owned the horses that I was there with, and she was an artist in her own right. And when she saw them, she said, these are really remarkable. And to have her impression that way was very timely, because I really felt that there was something different that had happened. And so when she recognized her horse in this very abstract sketch, I just had to realize that there was something going on, that someone who saw it could generate in their own body and mind and spirit the experience and the feeling beyond, oh, isn't that an interesting drawing? It like put them in the place of a numinous, elusive mindset, to understand that that the horse was an impression and something not defined, a more spiritual view. And that was an epiphany for me. And when I began asking questions about that within myself, that really led me to do the work that I do today. And even though now I do very realistic work as well, I infuse all of the work and the colors and the pastels and the work that I do. I learned to take that same mindset of the impression of an experience. Even if I'm looking at a photograph, I'm not just looking at the photograph of the horse, I'm there with the horse in their environment, or the light shining on their coat, or the feeling of their emotion. And I'm trying to draw that evocative place, rather than just a visual. It's really hard to explain, but I went to a wildlife art show once, and I looked at all the artists' work. And when I would ask the artists how, why they were inspired to draw any given thing, most of them would start talking about the habitat that the elephant lived in, or what type of breed they were, or the species, or whatever. And I could not. The work was beautiful and realistic and very impressive, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't connect with the being that was in the painting as an individual, and I couldn't feel as if they were standing in front of me. There was only a few artists that I felt that way about, and they usually didn't know that they were capable of what they were doing. So it's a fascinating conversation about what is reality, and what is the being themselves that art is offering a portal to.
So do you feel like the information you get, if you're painting from a photograph, do you feel the information that you get is carried on like spiritual channels, spiritual airwaves? You're just connecting with the soul of that horse and you get some of the information?
Yes.
Okay, because your work is fairly diverse, you'll have horses that, appear running through the clouds, through the water, horses with eagles and owls. When you paint those, are you looking for this? Okay, so in some of those paintings that you have, is that what comes to you through the horse, or are you trying to convey a message when you paint that? Or does the horse reveal to you that, I relate with eagles? How do you come up with those ideas?
Yeah, all of the above. It depends on the piece, and sometimes, like in some of the works you're describing, what I called my Kindred Spirit series, they were an idea that evolved through me trying to convey a message or a concept of the kinship of all life, and how beings reflect each other. And so, for instance, the first piece that started that series was a dolphin and a horse. And it came about not only through the visual idea, but it actually what preceded that was a conversation with someone who, and my own feeling about dolphins, that I was being drawn to dolphins at that time, especially more so than previously, where I just kept wanting to connect with dolphins and I couldn't figure out why. And then a woman that I spoke with was talking about her daughter's two favorite things were dolphins and horses. And I was like, yeah, what is that about dolphins and horses? And then the next day I just had this total image appear in my mind's eye, which rarely happens. So I was really paying attention, of the dolphin sort of superimposed over the horse's neck as if they were one being. And that just came to me like, this is something about this. I don't have the answer to why that is, but what happened through the art was that it initiated other conversations with people who said, I believe that too. Why is that? And then somebody sends me an email from Saudi Arabia and said that the Bedouins believe that dolphins and horses are connected. And so all those synchronicities evolved around exploring that concept. In addition to that, I also have learned shamanic journeying and work that I do on a spiritual level with my paintings, and particularly oftentimes portrait work that I do, what I call my soul essence portraits. And those pieces I've discovered that oftentimes when I'm meditating with a horse, they would show me an animal being that was like, it was almost like it was their totem. That they, even though they're a horse and an animal being, that they had their own guides and wisdom that they were seeking, or that they wanted to express to their person about who they were. And so, you know, dragonflies or eagles or other beings would come up in their portrait as a way of saying, I'm connected with this wisdom. And so it just, excuse me, it just depends on the piece, but it expands like the horse consciousness feeling of what they're trying to teach us. And my art is about trying to put it into symbology in a way that we can then explore, even if we don't have words for it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I really, I hear what you're saying. I never thought about horses as having their own totem or another animal, but none of us are an island. And it makes sense that animals are not an island either. Okay, so something I wanted to ask you was, with your, with how your relationship with horses, you have horses and you have a spiritual connection with your horses. How do you think your spiritual, I always wonder, like even with my horses, I feel like I have a deep spiritual connection with them. And I often wonder how my belief that we have this spiritual journey together affects them. And I think for me, the one thing is, especially my bay mare, she understands that she is listened to. She's very, very opinionated and she wants a say in everything. And so part of our spiritual agreement, I would say, is that I will listen and I will honor what you say. We have to do what is safe first, and then we can find ways to work around everything else. But I believe that's a really big deal with us in our spiritual journey. How do you think your horses understand your part in the spirituality between the two of you? It's kind of a hard
really
question.
good question.
It's kind of a hard question.
I think that because I work through a visual language, my impression of how my horse is connected with me often shows up in visual metaphors, like it would through my art. But ironically, I've only painted her a few times, so it's I say her being my mare Dharma, and I do have other beautiful horses here. Right now we have 3 and we've had 7 together, that 4 have passed. But Dharma was my beginning of my soul journey with horses. And so I believe that the universe connects us, and I'm aware of that because of the synchronicities that show up when I'm in a place where I can receive that information. And in her case, it's often through reflection. So we were talking about the Way of the Horse cards, which we'll discuss later. But one of the cards in that deck was a painting that I did called Dharma's Reflection, because it was based on, there you go. She's got it already. Yeah, and that was an experience that still is truly unexplained, which is what's so wonderful about it, where I was with her in her stall in a quiet moment, and she was looking at me, and I was taking a picture of her face and her eye. And in her eye, I later saw, this was back in the days of film cameras. So when I got the film developed, I looked in this tiny eye that was in the tiny photograph, and I caught my eye, and I saw that there was a horse reflected in her eye. And I thought about it, and I was like, how could that be? Because I'm standing in front of her, I have my camera, she's standing in front of me, and how could that, there's no other horse, so it was so amazing. And so I did a painting of it, and the card represents self-reflection, so it was a perfect metaphor for that.
Well,
But
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, interesting, because when we were speaking before I started the recording, you went to get your print of your new deck that you're doing. And I have this deck with you and Linda Kahanoff. And so I was sitting here, and while you went to get that, I pulled a card, and this is the card that came up.
I love that.
So kind of whoever who's listening, or for us,
Right.
Clearly it's a time of self-reflection.
Self-reflection. Yeah.
That's I just love when things like that happen, because when you left, I thought, well, I'll just pull a card and see maybe what we're going to talk about today. And that is the one that I pulled. That's why I got chills.
Yeah. And in the absence of your notes, which you so diligently prepared, the universe filled the vacuum.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that is an interesting topic itself for spirituality, is self-reflection through the horse. And I wonder if the horses see self-reflection through us.
I do think that, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like in giving her the freedom that I have, and trying to orchestrate her life in the way that we can work together to provide her with a life that that is not imposing on her anymore of her restrictions, which she had as a racehorse in her early life. That the universe conspires or helps show both of us that there's ways of communicating that we're still exploring, and that we're connected, because everywhere I turn, I see a reflection or something that shows me that it's almost like I see her as much in reflected images. Like I'll be up here at the house, and I'll be walking in the patio door, and I'll realize that she's reflected in the patio door behind me. Or, I'll look through the window. Like I even have that painting hanging in my studio, and I'll look at it sometimes, and I'll realize I'm seeing my own reflection in the glass on the painting. Or, so I'm always looking for things like that. And obviously she, as we all know, the horses show us our true selves. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to face when we're confronted with the parts of us that are even trying, in my case, it's being a caregiver for the animals and trying to help them. That is sometimes a stress for me, obviously. And so there's that reflection is a big part of my life with my animals, and trying to find boundaries around where do I find myself in that.
Right. That would be a whole seminars on self-reflection through,
Absolutely.
or a whole painting series on self-reflection through the horse. Okay, so I know that you said you have a new card deck coming out with Sue Ellen, I think. And so we had discussed you showing the picture and then talk about some of the symbology or the meanings within that picture. So if you'd like to go ahead and start with that.
Yeah, I would. So Sandra Wallen is my partner, co-creator in this. And she owns a beautiful center in Canada called Chiron's Way. And she and I met in 2003, actually about the same time that I met Linda Kohanov. And so it's really poetic that our deck is now coming to the forefront, as Linda's deck has all been a huge success. And Sandra and I have been working on this project for over 6 years, and we finally found a publisher, and I'm so thrilled. So it will be coming out in fall of 2023. And so I brought a picture of one of the paintings that I've created for it to show to your listeners and viewers. So this is Eohippus, the dawn horse. And if you look carefully, you'll see in the heart of this horse is the little prehistoric Eohippus, which is the beginning of the bloodline that led in evolution through to the modern horse. And it was interesting because when I created this, there was someone mentioned, why should we be interested in Eohippus? And because they're not a horse. And I'm like, but they are the beginning of horse. And so it's like this card is about evolutionary crossroads and how we make decisions and how our ideas and dreams branch off into, sometimes they branch off into a line that's not going to be completed or doesn't have enough fuel or resources to be truly evolved. And then other lines will track to a strong line and end up with something as majestic as the horse. And you see there's little lines here through the horse that go upwards, and they're a replication of the genetic lines that the strong line that led to Equus. And there's little footprints, I should say, because Eohippus had toes instead of hooves. And then up here are 2 horse hooves, so it leading to the horse. And so I just had so much fun painting the little Eohippus. I really wanted to research how anatomically they were, but also I wanted her personality and her little bright spirit. And so I'm very excited about this deck, and it's a creative challenge for me to do this work that's, I mean, my work has always been evocative for people who are seeking that connection with the spirit of the horse, and then to be working from scratch, really, to be creating those paintings of some of our most beloved myths like Pegasus and Unicorn, and as well as, I mean, there's so many mythical beings that are horses in our cultures around the world. And then also spiritual beings that are making themselves known to us that are like horse guides and horse souls. And then some living horses as well that are like my mare Dharma and that. So it's a very, very exciting project. I'm delighted to share with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing it. So is there was one more thing I had read on your site that I wanted to bring up on my notes that are non-notes because they didn't get printed. On your website, you said something about when you were talking about being with the horses, you said, in these magical moments, nature made herself known, and the horses were able to be themselves. And that's really an amazing line. And I wonder how many how many ways there are that we could apply that. So how many times are we with our horses? And I mean, one of my things I always say is we have this agenda. And so that can create a little bit of a problem. When we let go of the agenda, then we have more possibility. But when we, what are some ways you would think that nature would make themselves known? We could let the horse make itself known by just allowing. What did your quote say there? I gotta read that again. In these magical moments, nature made herself known and the horses were able to be themselves. Okay, so what would be maybe some words of wisdom or examples that the horse would be able to make themselves known outside of how we usually see them?
Right. Well, it's usually, in my experience, it's always been being with the horses in a way that didn't involve restraint or tack. And for me personally, it's when I'm on the ground, because I'm not a gifted rider. I know with a lot of people, the riding experience leads to that kind of epiphany or euphoria or connection. But I like, because I'm visual also, I really love looking into the horse's face, and that connection helps me let go of my mental chatter and to be just admiring them. And like I said about reflection, another aspect for me is light and shadow. So I'm always looking at how the world reflects on the horse's body, like the leaves shadowing on their coat, or the way the light hits their side, or the shine of their coat, or I can really get into that tactile visual meditation of being with such a beautiful being. And I think that nature, I see that sort of like nature. There's something about horses that because when they are with us and they are in that, in my case, a more still perspective, my admiration of their beauty puts me in that state of reverie, that and the light and the shadow and all these things I'm talking about is really like nature reflecting on them. It's different to me than a dog or a deer or a bird, because there's something about the horse's sculpted form and their size, how they are against the sky when you're in their presence, and they're just so vast. It seems like they command our attention, and you can't take your eyes off of them
Right.
when you're
They're very mysterious. I always think that the horse is so mysterious, and that's one of the reasons I'm with them, is because they draw me into the mystery. I tend to get I get caught up in thoughts. Sometimes I feel like, the hamster on the wheel. And when I'm with my horses, all of that goes away because they draw me into the mystery and out of the linear.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, I think we're about at the end of our time, but if you have anything else you'd like to add about the role that horses play in your relationship, feel free. And then you can also talk about where people can find out more about your work.
Sure. I think the only other thing I'd mention is that one of the things that I love about art, and I'm so honored to be able to create it, is that there are so many people in the world like I was that don't have horses, and live this sort of virtual life of wishing they did, or would watch your program, or be a member of your website, and would be wanting that experience. And I do have a lot of collectors and fans of my work that are in that place where they don't have that connection with a living horse, and maybe don't even have the opportunity to go be with horses. And so I think that I just want to invite them to, that's why a lot of people love my art, is because it gives them that missing piece of that connection of what we're describing. Because my intention by painting these paintings is to allow that experience to be felt, not just seen or dreamt of, but to truly meditate with a work of art in that same frame of mind, where you enter the painting and be with that horse as a meditation. And that's truly what my work is for. And I'm so touched that people do experience that through there. And so my website is spiritofhorse.com. And I call it Spirit of Horse rather than the horse or a horse, because if it was a capital, it would be capital H, horse, because it's the group consciousness and the beingness of horse, as well as the beautiful individuals that we love. And I also have an e-cards website, which is wonderful, personalizable greetings that are little animated movies with music and poetry that can be sent to your friends and loved ones. And my biggest thing I'm working on now, which I'm so excited about, is I'm creating a subscription-based membership for my inspirations, which are poetry art emails, and that go out weekly to invite us to be in this synchronous experience of wisdom from the horse. So thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak about it.
Well, I appreciate you being a guest and sharing your thoughts and your artistic, soulful perspective. So thanks for joining us for this Soul Horse Sunday conversation with Kim McElroy. And I'm Delea with True North Equestrians. If you'd like more information about any of the work that I do, you can visit my website, truenorthequestrians.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.